How do you extract a human being from the safety of their own home in the dead of night without leaving a definitive, easily readable trail for law enforcement to follow? How do you carry out a crime so baffling, so devoid of clear logistical sense, that nearly 2 full months later, the entire world is still fiercely debating the most fundamental facts of the case? This is the chilling reality that sits at the very heart of the Nancy Guthrie case. When we look closely at the physical evidence, the geography of the property, and the agonizingly confusing timeline of the investigation, we are left with a terrifying, multidimensional puzzle. At the absolute center of this puzzle is a profound question of logistics, a question of physical space, and a question of shadows. How did the intruders actually get in? And perhaps infinitely more importantly, how did they take Nancy out? Let us begin by exhaustively examining the rear of the property, because the physical landscape itself tells a story that contradicts many of the initial public assumptions. When you look at the back of the home, you are immediately confronted by rough, unforgiving terrain. It is a landscape that does not easily yield to quiet footsteps, especially in the blinding darkness of the night. To imagine a scenario where anyone, let alone a group of panicked intruders operating under the adrenaline of a home invasion, could successfully and silently carry an elderly woman through that hazardous, uneven environment borders on the logically impossible. The physical exertion required, the extreme risk of stumbling or falling, the sheer amount of noise it would inevitably generate, it simply does not add up to a clean getaway. Because of this massive logistical nightmare, seasoned experts and tactical minds analyzing the scene have deduced a far more sinister, calculated theory. They believe, with strong conviction, that the back door of the home was never intended to be an exit path at all. Instead, it was a carefully chosen, highly strategic point of entry. It was a physical portal utilized, not for an escape into the night, but to quietly and deliberately let additional accomplices slip into the home, undetected from the darkness outside. The primary focus of this investigation has aggressively and rightfully zeroed in on a highly specific detail that Savannah Guthrie herself famously referred to during an interview as the propped open doors. The plural use of that specific word, doors, is absolutely crucial to understanding the mechanical reality of this home invasion. For weeks on end, there was a relentless whirlwind of public speculation, media rumors, and internet sleuthing about which specific doors were actually involved in the physical breach of the property. Initially, according to reporting by prominent journalist Brian Entin, an inside source revealed that it was a screen door leading out to the home's beautifully landscaped outdoor area that was deliberately wedged open. It is undeniably a beautiful backyard. But that aesthetic beauty masks a chilling crime scene. But the architectural mystery did not stop with just one screen door. It was definitively clarified by investigators and commentators alike that the intruders did not compromise the heavy sliding glass doors, which are typically the most vulnerable points of a modern home. Instead, Savannah's specific plural reference pointed directly to a highly specific middle entrance. At the very back of the house, an entrance that leads straight into the heart of the kitchen. This particular entrance consisted of both a secondary screen door and a primary solid wooden door. Adding yet another fascinating layer of complexity to the crime scene analysis, journalist Ashley Banfield provided a photograph of the kitchen's interior door to help the public visualize the space. Furthermore, Banfield suggested that a third physical barrier, a garden gate situated on the edge of the outdoor area, had also been compromised and left ajar. The intruders didn't just leave these heavy barriers casually open to the wind. They meticulously and intentionally used heavy potted plants, to physically prop both the screen door and the backyard gate wide open. But as analytical minds, we must stop and ask ourselves, why go through that highly specific, time-consuming effort? In the middle of a high-stakes, adrenaline-fueled crime, did the suspects initially breach the home through the sliding glass doors, which are notoriously easier to defeat, and then take the time to circle back, to deliberately prop the kitchen screen door open for the rest of their crew? Propping multiple doors open with heavy flower pots is not an accident. It is a highly tactical, deliberate move. It only really makes logical sense if there is more than one perpetrator operating inside the house, requiring a guaranteed, unhindered route to move freely in and out of the structure without being locked out. Or, alternatively, it strongly suggests that they originally planned to carry Nancy out through that very same backyard route, requiring clear pathways for carrying a heavy load. Yet, despite these meticulous preparations at the rear of the property, according to the expert analysis of a SWAT commander looking at the forensic evidence, that back entrance was strictly used for getting in. He firmly agrees that the intruders ultimately had to abandon whatever rear exit strategy they had planned, forcing them to leave through the front of the home. His reasoning is firmly anchored in a chilling piece of physical forensic evidence, the discovery of blood found on the front steps of the property, strongly indicating a violent exit path took place right out the front door. What is genuinely staggering and frankly entirely unacceptable from a law enforcement perspective about this entire case is the timeline of the public investigation. A full 59 days, nearly 2 entire months after the tragic incident occurred, the public, the media, and online sleuths were still fiercely debating the most basic, fundamental point of entry. People were only just figuring out, almost 60 days later, what doors and entrances actually existed along the rear elevation of the home. The only reason the true crime community was even actively discussing the kitchen doors and the garden gate was because Savannah explicitly brought them up in an interview. In any competent by-the-book investigation, establishing exactly how an intruder breached a home is True Crime 101. It should be at the absolute top of the priority list for any detective working a major case. These questions of ingress and egress ought to be asked and definitively answered on day 1, day 2, and day 3 of the investigation. When you look back at history's most infamous and heavily analyzed mysteries, the entry and exit points form the very foundation of the entire investigative narrative. They are the building blocks upon which every other theory must rely. In the John Benet Ramsey case, establishing the point of forced entry is the very first question anyone asks when looking at the evidence. Investigators and the public painstakingly scrutinized 3 main access points, though there were essentially a lot more that required examination. They relentlessly debated the basement window situated beneath the metal grill, which still to this day deserves a massive amount of scrutiny. They meticulously analyzed the wine cellar door, deeply questioning the mechanics of its latch, and the physical position of the light switch. And they heavily scrutinized the butler's pantry door that was apparently left open, a detail that ultimately ended up being a frustrating false alarm for detectives. When you dig deeper into the layout of the Ramsey house, a host of other doors come up that needed to be systematically investigated, just in order to exclude them from the realm of possibility. Similarly, in the tragic and globally publicized disappearance of Madeleine McCann, the entire world intensely debated the physical boundaries of the Ocean Club apartment. The intense investigative focus immediately shifted to the sliding glass doors, the specific wooden door near the parking lot entrance, and the window leading directly into the children's bedroom. The profound confusion in these highly publicized cases is often wildly exacerbated by official police statements that mistakenly swap terminology, routinely confusing the front door for the rear door, and the front door as the rear. Reading through these official documents, you have to concentrate intensely, just to keep a handle on what is actually being communicated about the physical layout of the crime scene. In the McCann case, understanding the physical reality required literally traveling to Portugal, standing at the Ocean Club, and physically testing how the window blind's mechanism worked. Yet, in the Nancy Guthrie case, we see a massive, frustrating disconnect between basic investigative principles and public discourse. The true crime community has been incredibly busy pointing fingers, making wild accusations, and casting heavy suspicion on brother-in-laws and various family members. They are essentially jumping over 20 logical hurdles just to proudly say, "I think it's that person," without even establishing the bare basics of the crime scene. They don't even know which way the intruder got in, or how they defeated the home's security. How can anyone realistically demand forensic evidence when no one even knows which specific doorway investigators should be swabbing for DNA or testing for physical evidence? This widespread systemic confusion is only deepened by wildly conflicting reports leaking out about the interior of the crime scene itself. One anonymous source sent absolute shockwaves through the community by claiming that blood was discovered inside the foyer, right on the inside of the front door. Have any of you guys heard that specific rumor? If that information is true, if there was indeed blood on the interior of the front entryway, it would heavily suggest, almost definitively, that Nancy was violently taken out through the front entrance. However, we must critically trace the origin of this explosive claim. As far as the reporting goes, this information stems solely from Ashley Banfield's network of anonymous sources. At the exact same time, other insiders were insisting to the media that the interior of the house was absolutely immaculate, showing zero signs of a violent struggle or a traditional crime scene. You simply cannot have an immaculate house and a bloody foyer simultaneously. It is a glaring, irreconcilable contradiction. I do not believe people would be describing the inside as immaculate if there was blood sitting inside the front door of the home. Perhaps there is a minor contradiction where there is blood somewhere in one isolated spot, while the rest of the home is completely immaculate. But interpreting this evidence from afar is incredibly difficult. Either someone is grossly misinformed, someone is flat out wrong, or all the reporting is somehow accurate in a bizarre way we don't yet understand. However, looking at the totality of the circumstances, I tend to think the rumor about blood inside the foyer is completely wrong. It is highly probable that the blood in the foyer rumor was simply a garbled mistranslation of the confirmed blood found outside at the porch. When evaluating the physical evidence, the detail about the propped open rear doors comes from Savannah herself, a far better, far more reliable source than anonymous leaks. And logically, we have to return to the core question. Why would intruders take the time to physically wedge open multiple rear doors with potted plants, if they never intended to go back out the same way? This brings us to a highly compelling, deeply terrifying theory about what actually transpired in the darkness of that night. It is entirely possible, and perhaps highly likely, that the suspects never initially intended to use the front entrance at all. Their plan was to enter and exit purely through the rear of the property. However, during the chaotic course of the home invasion, the plan unraveled, perhaps because it activated, perhaps because one of their crew went that way and a light actually went on. They felt they had unfinished business with it, realizing they had been recorded by a security camera. The intruders altered their exit strategy entirely. They returned to it, possibly with Nancy in tow, and removed it, and perhaps even confronted Nancy with this camera and said, "Give us the footage." Obviously, she couldn't comply with that impossible demand. Perhaps that is exactly what upset them, and that is why they returned to the front and violently removed it. But if we accept this terrifying theory that the camera drove them to the front of the house and forced an exit through the front door, it leaves a lingering, deeply frustrating question. If they ultimately dragged her out the front door, why not leave it open? I mean, surely they left the rear door open because that's exactly why they were propped open in the first place. Does it make any logical sense that panicked criminals would take the time to secure the front door while fleeing, while leaving the back of the house completely exposed to the elements? The profound mystery of the physical break-in is matched only by the intense, polarizing debate over the motive behind the crime. During a heartbreaking interview, Savannah shared a crucial, illuminating detail about her family's immediate reaction to the crisis. She stated that her brother, a brilliant man who spent his career in the military, worked extensively in intelligence, and served as a fighter pilot, saw the situation clearly right away. Upon hearing the news of his mother's disappearance, his high-level military and intelligence training kicked in, and he immediately concluded that his mother had been kidnapped. Following this public revelation, a former FBI agent publicly stated on television that the brother jumping to a kidnapping conclusion so quickly was a massive red flag. But that assessment by the ex-FBI agent feels incredibly disconnected from reality, and I completely disagree with it. When you consider the full context of this specific family, the kidnapping theory is not suspicious, it is glaringly obvious. Savannah Guthrie is an incredibly wealthy, powerful, and famous national television anchor. Assuming her mother was targeted and kidnapped for a ransom is not a red flag. It is the most logical, terrifying, and immediate first thought anyone in their position would have. At that early point in the investigation, no ransom demands had been made. I didn't necessarily think it was the absolute likeliest possibility, but it was certainly something that occurred to me right in the beginning as well. It is incredibly hard not to imagine a financially motivated crime when you are dealing with any wealthy, highly influential family. This is a grim, terrifying reality that happens all the time in places like South Africa, where wealthy people are routinely kidnapped and exorbitant ransoms are demanded from their desperate families. For a military intelligence expert to instantly recognize the high-risk profile of his own famous family is not suspicious. It is just pure common sense. If they were a completely ordinary, unknown family living in the suburbs, and someone instantly imagined an elaborate kidnapping for ransom right in the beginning, yes, that would absolutely be a red flag. But this isn't an ordinary family. The fame, the wealth, and the exposure fundamentally change the nature of the threat landscape. Anyway, I'm not going to take it further than that for now, as we continue to meticulously analyze the deep dysfunctions of this case, much like the intense complexities and dysfunctions found in the Ramsey household. One thing remains absolutely certain. The quiet home with the propped open doors holds secrets that are only just beginning to surface. Look out for that continued analysis in the next video. Thank you for listening, and I will see you guys next time.